ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Cameron Ivey here at Transcend alongside Dave Barmore. We're excited to kick off our new series where we help you break down the three most important updates as it relates to privacy and AI policy here in the US. So, Dave, let's begin with the first one, Doge and data privacy. I'm reading a lot of headlines with the layoffs and the uncertainties in regards to Elon Musk and his team at Doge. Talk to me a little bit about the data privacy concerns with this group and how it's raised a lot of questions where it all stands.
Thanks, Cam. A lot to unpack there with this first issue. So as you mentioned, Elon Musk has been running this Department of Government Efficiency, Doge. A lot of headlines have been generated on the legality, the way they're going about, downsizing and really fundamentally changing a lot of these federal agencies. One interesting kind of side debate that's come out of this has been kind of the data privacy implications, as you raised, right? The reality is this group now has access to highly sensitive information, such as, social security numbers, health data with the Health and Human Services, right? All these agencies have highly sensitive information of Americans. And I think the question now of whether Doge should have access to all of this data is really become front and center. So what we've seen so far, Democratic attorney generals at the state level have filed a lawsuit basically saying that Doge and their access to the Treasury Department. So if you'll think back in February, Doge got access to the Treasury Department's payment system, highly sensitive payment data in that. So the Democratic AGs filed a lawsuit and preliminary injunction was granted that barred Doge from getting access to these sensitive records. Since then, also, a federal judge has also blocked Doge from having access to other agencies like the Social Security Administration. Again, really highlighting the methods as to how Doge is going about accessing this data as, overly broad and really kind of lacking concrete evidence as to why they need this type of data. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I think we'll continue to see kind of a drip of this as the group turns its focus on kind of different federal agencies. But that's kind of the state of play with what's going on.
I like that drip drip thing. Is that like a broken sink or something?
Hopefully not, but just the continual kind of, we'll continue to see this. This week they just announced that Elon might be stepping back from heading up this group. So that'll be interesting to see what that means for the future of this group and some of the lawsuits that are out there on this data privacy piece as well.
Thanks for diving into that, Dave. So besides the lawsuit, how are federal policymakers responding to all of this? Will this impact conversations around a federal data privacy framework, you think?
As you know, Cam, the concept of a federal framework for how private entities and government entities collect and maintain and use, sensitive personal identifiable information, that's been a debate that's been had here in Congress for decades now.
Yeah.
Resolution is yet to be seen on that. So I think what this Doge kind of data privacy development does is really bring into the forefront how the federal government maintains our information and our data, right? I think a lot of the conversation, you could say rightfully so, has been on, these private companies, whether it's social media platforms, different fitness apps. That's taken up a lot of the conversation. But interestingly, I think with Doge, now the conversation's turned to, all right, well, what about the federal government? So in response to that, you have a Democratic member, Lori Trahan, leadership on the House side has come out saying that she intends to reform the Federal Privacy Act, which is a law that was passed nearly 50 years ago, and it's in need of some modernizing, to say the least. But she wants to take a look as to how we could modernize that law that governs how federal, agencies collect and maintain our personal information. So that process is going to play out. She's currently doing a request for information. You got different civil liberties groups that are going to comment, private industry. It'll be interesting to see how that gets into the mix on top of, children's online safety, which I know we're going to talk here in a second, and children's privacy, all these kind of sectoral, whether it's geolocation. It'll be interesting to see how this kind of government use of data gets absorbed into this broader kind of debate.
No, that's fascinating. And we're going to be interested to stay close to this as this develops. And again, it's been a roller coaster this first quarter. So really looking forward to the fireworks as the year goes on.
They're going to get the popcorn out.
Yeah. So Dave, let's shift focus to our second update here, which is Congress and children's online safety, as you mentioned, around privacy. I saw that DC lawmakers are restarting this debate since they reached an impasse on the subject last year before the holidays. What's the latest there for us?
Cam, as you mentioned, every new Congress, which we just started the new Congress here in January, all the debate on these issues that didn't make it past the finish line have to start over. So, like you said, the debate around children's online safety, children's privacy, all of those issues were not passed and agreed upon last December. So now we're starting that clock over again. So you'll see on the House side last week, the House Energy and Commerce Committee held a hearing to talk about examining the harms of online activity with the special focus on kids' online safety and data privacy. You have bills out there such as the Kids Online Safety Act, COSA, as it's said, COPPA 2.0. All of these bills would look to either regulate these social media platforms or update the existing federal Children's Privacy Act, which is the COPPA 2.0. All of those bills were on the agenda for the debate last week. What I thought was interesting is that instead of talking about the substance and merit of the bills itself, a lot of the conversation was on some recent developments that have happened just weeks ago, where you had President Trump announced that he was firing two of the FTC commissioners. So Rebecca Kelly Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya, two of the Democratic commissioners, were fired by President Trump. That's being challenged on whether Trump had the authority to do that. But I think that does raise a question on enforcement of these laws. FTC is the de facto regulator on all things federal privacy. There's a conversation on whether states attorney generals should share in some of those enforcement responsibilities, but the FTC is the main agency for that. So if you've got Doge out there, really culling and paring down the resources that these federal agencies have, and you have these Democratic commissioners that are being fired, I think a lot of the Democratic committee staff during this hearing spent their time, instead of talking about the legislation, talking about the state of whether we're going to have the resources to enforce these laws. So I think that was interesting to me, just to show that, again, I think we're a ways out before we see any kind of agreement on these issues. So keep watching. I think we'll see some activity coming up in the Senate, but that's going to be a slog as we look forward to how that kind of develops at the federal level.
Well, I think that kind of covers all the latest on federal updates. So thank you, Dave, for that. Let's turn our focus for the last update, which is where we'll kind of see some of the real action happening in the states, which is important, right? So we're about halfway through many of the states' legislative sessions. Can you walk us through some of the big developments as it relates to state AI and data privacy policy?
Yeah, happy to. The Wild West. That's what I love about the states. We're, about halfway through many of the states' kind of legislative sessions, as you mentioned. So I think we'll start to see a real uptick in the amount of bills that are moving. I think it's fascinating to say over 900 bills have been introduced on the subject of artificial intelligence alone. So that's surely not all of those bills will pass, but it just shows you the sheer breadth of the number of proposals that are out there on how to regulate this nascent technology. So interestingly, New York State, we've talked about this. Some folks at Transcend have put out some really great pieces on the New York Health Information Privacy Act. So this was a bill that was passed in the first couple weeks of the New York State legislative calendar, looking to regulate consumer health data. That term is very broadly defined. And so I think you'll see industry looking to influence how the governor will exercise her veto chapter amendment strategy there. So I'd watch that closely. On Virginia, I think an interesting development happened last week. You had the governor, Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin, actually vetoed a bill that would have regulated high-risk AI models. The bill passed through the legislature along party lines. So you had mostly Democratic support for this bill. It was expected that the governor was going to veto. Why I think this is important is because you've seen, I think, as these states have debated this issue, just in this session alone, an increase in the politics that have played out on this issue of how to regulate AI and not wanting to have too much of a heavy hand approach, which would, potentially stifle innovation. So you have more and more conservatives coming out, saying that we need to really look at this under a light touch kind of regulatory framework. So I think the Virginia veto is important because we'll continue to see more states pause and I think re-examine some of the proposals that are out there. Texas is a great example of that, where you had a bill by a Republican that was being pushed just recently, significantly revised to kind of pare down and address some of the concerns that were raised from some conservatives on the bill. So watch this space. I think, of those 900 bills, I think now we're seeing signs that there could be less activity on this, just again, due to some of the concerns on not wanting to stifle innovations. Like I said, we're about to enter into a really crazy period where we'll have bills passing left and right. So we'll keep you all up to speed on what's important and what's relevant to you all in the privacy community. And it's going to be a crazy couple months here at the state level. So we'll keep you all in the mix.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dave, for helping us make sense of all this craziness. And we look forward to the next session.
We'll see you soon. Thanks, Cam. Appreciate it.